and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. And this is your special edition program. Your host, Buddy Sotelo Esquire, but also Javier Ojst. And do you want to introduce the rest of our wonderful guests for tonight?
Sure. First, we'll go with Benny Scala, first time guest on the show, but I feel like I've known him for a long time, but he's a writer for Pro Wrestling Stories. Overall, a great guy. He was a guest, pretty frequent guest on Wrestling with the Future, and now he's a co-host for In the Ring with Dan and Benny, and old school wrestling fan, 100%. And then we got Ryan K. Bowman, a veteran who writes wrestling, sports, interviews, the who's who on YouTube. I've read his stuff, watched his stuff on YouTube, and I love his work, and I'm glad both are here.
Yes, well, we're all tied together with Pro Wrestling Stories, which has been, a great unifier in the wrestling community to really bring the voices of old schoolers like ourselves, back into kind of into the forefront and given a voice of the people that loved old school wrestling and still feel like there's a place for it in today's modern entertainment world. And I've certainly been thinking about that a lot, but I want to find out a little bit, because it's the first time that you've been on the show, Benny. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the photo behind you as part of your background and explain a little bit about your connections with professional wrestling?
Well, pretty much just a fan my whole life. What you see in back of me was taken on December the 16th, I believe, 2017, at Rico's Italian Restaurant in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I got to have Christmas dinner with Bruno Sammartino and his family, and along with Dominic DeNucci was there. My friend Mike Miggett, and then Donnie Iris was there as well, the entertainer.
I love Donnie Iris.
Oh, yeah. Love's Like a Rock. And then with Aaliyah and the rapper, actually, by the Jaggers, right? He was the lead singer for that in 1970. So it was. I told my kids, besides you guys being born, this is the greatest night in the history of my life. And it's what actually got me to start writing, because before that, I wrote stories for my kids, and I actually wrote a song back in 1970. I had it copyrighted. I wrote one of my friends did a comedy show here at Nassau Community College, and I helped him write that. So I've always written stuff, but it was always for fun. But after that night with Bruno, I thought, I got to write about this, and I wrote the title of the story is Campo del Sogni, which is Italian for Field of Dreams, because that's my favorite movie, and that was my Field of Dreams. It was surreal the whole night, and that's what got me started writing. Now I'm way behind Javier. I told him, his writing career, I'm the Washington Generals. I'm Red Klotz, and he's Meadowlark Lemon. He's ahead of me like 68-6, but I'm going to catch up. It's the last thing I do.
Well, that's
Ryan's about 1,000 to whatever we've written. So let's be real here.
First things first. I got to catch you first.
Well, I just want podcast, so I did catch up to you guys writing wise.
I want to say one thing about Benny. Benny is absolutely he's just way too modest when it comes to writing. The only thing I have on Benny, is that I've written more articles, and the only reason for that is because I started before him. But Benny's stuff, I love reading his stuff. His personality just shines through every article he's written. And I tell, he's always putting me over, and I'm telling Benny right now, the only thing I got on you is more articles, and and that's it. But he's a natural writer. I build things little by little, and something comes out of it that's readable. But Benny, his stuff just flows. So
thank you.
That's and Ryan, I read his whenever he puts something on.
All three guys are really talented.
Ryan's a veteran, man.
Yeah, I'm so old. My first interview was with Moses.
Yeah.
So honestly, I hate to pull the old guy card, but I actually started in 1990 when I was 15. So now you're talking, 30 years later. So it's like, it's always a joy for me to see other people that come along the funniest thing about it is no matter how long you do it, you always learn something from people that come in and have a different perspective from you, no matter if they've been writing for 5 months or 50 years.
Absolutely.
You know.
All
And by the way,
Brian,
Javier, before you start
Brian,
giving these compliments my way, I read an excellent story you did. I believe it was about Mildred Burke
Okay.
the other day.
Yes.
Did you just do a story about her not too long ago? I
Not
think
recent. It was about maybe 5 months ago.
Yeah,
I've lost with the pandemic. I've lost track of time, but
I just kind of caught up with it the other day, and I loved it. It was excellent, man.
Right.
Great.
Thank you.
So yeah, all three of you guys, I'd like to throw the question out there. What was what you remember as your first like wrestler that excited you? And what was the first move that you saw, that like first finisher that you saw that really like made you go, wow, you know, and made you think about it? Whoever wants to answer it first, go right ahead.
Well, I'll throw. I don't know if you guys can see back here. I've got the autograph, the very first wrestling magazine I ever bought in 1985. I bought it because it had Ricky Steamboat on the cover, and he was my favorite. I had just made that jump to WWF at the time and was doing the kind of the ninja style gimmick or whatever, and I loved that. Loved the whole martial arts thing. So I bought the magazine in '85, and then it was just a few years ago. I was doing a show with Ricky where I was the ring announcer. Was able to give him that magazine, you know, almost, you know, over 30 years later. I think it was 32 years old at that point, and he signed it. So that's on my wall in here in my office. So that he was my first guy that really excited me with his moves. But honestly, it was a few years later. The first time I ever saw a power bomb, that blew my mind. Now it's commonplace, but when I first saw guys in the late 80s start doing the power bomb, I just thought it was the most devastating thing I'd ever seen.
Well, that's commonplace because so many people are getting concussions from it. So you're seeing less and less. But how about you, Javier?
Well, my dad gave me a tape of Saturday Night's Main Event, which doesn't say anything about wrestling. So I just popped it into VCR, and all of a sudden you see the intro, you see Jesse Ventura making fun of the Hillbillies, and you see Roddy Piper and Hulk Hogan, of course. But once you start watching, the person that impressed me the most was Paul Orndorff as a heel. Oh, yeah. What an intensity, what believability, and didn't matter if my parents would watch it and like, oh, that's not real and all that, whatever. When I would watch people like Orndorff and he would do that power driver, I'm like, this makes me. This can't be fake. This guy is so intense, so mean,
it's still the best
so believable.
pile driver in the business. When I think of the dictionary definition of the pile driver, it's Orndorff's pile driver.
He was just always so just pissed that the referee would tell him to stop. When I tell you to break, you break, and he's like, "Don't touch me," and he's just so just angry at the world, and he's like this guy is a heel. You know, this is great. You know.
Did you ever see his workout video?
Oh yeah, I love
the
it.
one where he goes into the gym.
I love
gives
that.
everyone a hard time. That's on YouTube. If people haven't seen it, it's one of the great little old segments that they used to do, and it's a crack up. It's really
he just tears everyone down. Women, the guy, the skinny guy, everyone. This kind of that non-PC promo is so missed, at least for me. I'm sorry. If listeners tune out because of what I said, I am so sorry. No, don't invite me back. I love those promos. No. I love those promos, you know.
Awesome. Benny, you tell me.
All right, so I'm going to go really old school on you guys. So Christmas of 1967, I was 12 years old. I get a Hitachi 12-inch black and white TV for Christmas. Bring it up to my room. You know, I'm messing around with it, and I see this UHF dial, which we didn't really watch UHF, you know, in our family room. And I'm screwing around with this TV, and it must have been Saturday night. I hit channel 47 out of Newark, New Jersey, and they have Capital Wrestling from Washington, D.C., which was hosted by Ray Morgan, who was one of the first WWF announcers. And I was transfixed by Bruno, and there was a match. Bruno didn't wrestle that much on TV, but he happened to wrestle Crazy Luke Graham. It was a squash match. It lasted probably about 3 minutes, but in the end, Bruno got Luke in the backbreaker, And that was my poor brother, who was 6 years younger than me. He tapped out to more backbreakers than any of Bruno's opponents. But that was my finishing hold.
Nice.
Just to add a little bit to that, I've heard stories of people who lived it, watched it. When Zbyszko turned on Bruno, there were people who weren't really that big wrestling fans, but they knew what was going on. But when Zbyszko turned on Bruno, the casual fan just kind of, I've heard they looked at the TV and said, "Son of a," and just cursed at whatever. They were just so incensed about that turn that had never, something like that was so rare in wrestling. Now it happens every Monday.
They had the courage to build that over like almost like a 2-year span, right?
Yeah, it was one of those things that just didn't happen often at all.
They did such a good job. Bruno was a maestro, because after it happened, then he started calling Larry a Judas. And I mean,
yeah,
what the business they did after that was incredible. And like you said, I think it was a good year, probably more than that they went around the circuit and, that they sold everywhere out.
So Ryan, what finisher was the one that you just totally marked out on, that you could first remember completely marking out on?
This is going to be sad because I grew up a huge fan of the Von Erichs, and while I know that it's not considered even a cool move now, the Iron Claw, for some reason, every time one of the Von Erich boys would fire up, make the comeback, and eventually tap on the Iron Claw, my 7-8-year-old mind was thinking, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Don't undersell yourself, because the guy that intrigued me the most when I was young was the Spoiler.
Oh yeah, and he just cranked that, right?
Yeah, he sure. Spoiler? Well, he also would do the thing where he would grab onto the guy's head and then walk the ropes too.
Oh,
Would, and I've never seen a big man move like that. And plus, I love masks. I love but not so much the lucha masks as much as I like the big, mysterious, masked, scary guy. I've always, my whole career, worked with somebody with a mask, just a big guy that can't talk, that won't talk, doesn't get on the mic, just looks scary. And that's always been one of the gimmicks that I've always worked with from the very beginning.
And that walk in the ropes. Oh, that walk in the ropes thing, that's where the Undertaker got that from. Right, it was from Don Jardine.
Yeah, so I wish I'd
seen, sorry about that.
I only saw Don Jardine once in a squash match, really late in the 80s, when he was kind of, near the end of his career. And I really wish I had seen some of the earlier matches that I've seen on YouTube live, like against Brody or against some of the other upper, WWF talent and some of the world-class talent or NWA talent that he was up against. So, we were before we turned on the camera, we were having a really nice discussion about wrestling that's going on right now today. I know it isn't, usually what we focus on that much with wrestling and everything coast to coast. But you're wearing the AEW hat, so it sort of already lends discussion as far as that goes. And I'm way behind on AEW. I haven't watched it much since the holidays, since Christmas and everything. I've been busy on a lot of things too. We're also talking about the NWA starting back up with, I believe it's Shockwave now. Thanks to
is it Shockwave? We were talking about that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you had an opportunity to see it? Anyone had an opportunity to see it?
Yeah. But I always tell people to watch the Thunder Rosa and Serena Deeb match.
That is one of the best matches I've ever seen. Absolutely.
I tell them, please make the time to watch that match. That's women's professional wrestling at its finest. Please watch that match.
And that's an interesting subtopic about, did you ever think, when you were watching wrestling in, the 80s and early 90s, that you'd recommend a women's match over any, men's match that was going on, currently?
I'm in my case, I'm a huge Wendy Richter mark, and I just let's put away the technical aspects of their matches but the intensity and and how aggressive they would go at each other was very refreshing. You know, like when you watch either boxing or MMA, when women's MMA or boxing, a lot of times they go straight at each other and they don't do the little, you know, the walking around and kind of faking. They like going straight to the business, you know. So I think that's refreshing when it comes to women's wrestling. If you watch from the '80s and certainly the '70s had good stars and all that, you know. Vivian Vachon, you know.
Wendy Richter started it, but my real crush was Medusa Michelli.
Yeah, she was. Well, she kind of combined, you know, martial arts and wrestling but women's wrestling started evolving and she cut her teeth in Japan just like Wendy, but it was just a different era. She went with some of the best in Japan, you know.
She was the first lady I believe could really, you know, go in toe to toe with most men and, you know, not be a total work, not look like it was a totally worked match. She's very believable in the ring, and I'm desperately trying to land her as a guest on this show. So that's not, you know, the call is out, you know. For
you're like, what would have been the emails? Medusa, this is the 15th message I've sent you, and I just want you to reconsider.
Well, I know she's really busy, but we're hoping maybe to luck out and get her in the spring. You know, I'd love to have her on the show. Who are some of your favorite female wrestlers, Benny and Ryan?
Well, I mean, back in the day, I kind of had a crush on Donna Christianello. Now, we're going way back in the late 60s. She used to tag with Tony Rose. And I can't even remember who their opponents was, who the babyface women wrestlers were in the WWF back in the late 60s. But she was one of my favorites. And then, you know, Medusa, same thing. Medusa struck me as somebody who could, you know, actually kick somebody's ass. I mean, she was very believable to me.
Until she met what's her name? What's the Japanese girl with the hair all stuck up? I forgot. I know
you're talking about too.
I'll remember. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I would say
Bull Nakano.
Yes.
I would say for me, you know, the thing that I remember back in the 80s and 90s is there just wasn't a high demand for female wrestling. You know, you would maybe every now and then you would see a card that had a women's match on it. But for the most part, that was an exception, not the rule. As far as the great competitors back then, you guys mentioned Medusa. I mean, you had someone like Susan Sexton, who was just a tremendously talented technical wrestler. As far as a crush for me, this is going to be an odd one, but for me, it was Misty Blue Sims, who looked like if she wasn't a wrestler, she would be like working as a waitress in a diner somewhere. But I don't know. She just seemed like this down-home girl. She always kind of did the USA gimmick and everything like that. So I always loved her, and I always thought she was a great wrestler as well.
She was pretty strong in the Northeast, but she just never worked for WWF, right?
Yeah, she did some NWA stuff in the 80s. Mm-hmm. I think it's one time, I guess, the women's champion was called the NWA North American Women's Champion. I think she had that for a while. Of course, we had the LPWA, which was pretty successful and brought a lot of those ladies together in the late 80s.
I love the LPWA.
That's where Susan Sexton made her name, you know, really as the longtime champion of the LPWA. And Susan was just terrific. A lot of these ladies, you know, I wonder, the people like Medusa or Misty Blue Sims or Susan Sexton or, you know, that generation, what would they have fared like in an era like today where women's wrestling carries such a high priority on the card?
Well, yeah, and you've seen the popularity of the Glow series, you know, really shows that, you know, that the general public, you know, has accepted women's wrestling now to the level at which they accept men wrestling. It's now not seen as unladylike or undignified for girls to get in the ring.
Yeah, and, you know, Shimmer, you know, Shimmer has been very successful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I worked.
You work with Melissa. You work with Melissa, right?
Not only Melissa, but I started my manager training at the same time that Sarah Del Rey started in as a valet, and so she practiced.
She's rough, man.
What?
She's rough. She's rough.
Oh
man.
God, yes. Well, when she was still learning about how to, like, you know, pull her punches and how to do low blows. Hey, buddy. get over there. Let Sarah, go to work on you. And she would just haul off. And I can tell you how many times she would hit me like right in the side of the ear. You're supposed to hit it with the side of your forearm, so it's not so bad. But she would just cut me right on the side of my ear. And the low blows, she'd hit me right in the junk. And I would be like down for like 20 minutes. And all the other guys were like,
"That's the way not to do it." Did everyone
exactly?
Get that?
All the other boys were like, "Yeah, buddy, you're really learning the ropes now." I'm like, "No." And I have another little funny story about a female manager, a valet who was trying out, and she's short. She's like maybe 4'8", 4'9", or whatever, and she was learning how to bounce on the ropes. And I always use this as a story that people say, everything in the ring is fake. Nothing is real. I said, well, you can hurt yourself on some of the most mundane things in the ring. And this little girl, she was so sweet, but she was doing the ropes, and she was bouncing back off the ropes, but her arm was too short to reach over the top rope. Mm-hmm. So most people don't realize that the rope is just steel cable with like a garden hose around it, or just rolls of tape wrapped around it. So it's not... people think it's like this giant rubber band, and it's not. It's a solid piece of material that if you hit it wrong, it really hurts. Yeah. And she hit the back of her head right where you would have the rabbit punch. She hit the nerve center right at that base of her skull, and so she bounced off the rope, knocked herself out, and landed just like Greg the Hammer Valentine used to do. But Greg knew it was coming, and she landed right on her face and like really screwed up her nose, and that was the end. She never came back into wrestling again. So it's tough in the ring. Most people don't understand. A lot of these girls, because of their size, can have a lot of trouble adapting to what would never happen to the great Khali that I worked with. Also in APW. So.
Yeah. That's a podcast. That's a show in itself with Dalip. What was his name there?
Dalip Singh.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was quite an unusual individual to see. Literally, I saw him right as he stepped foot in APW, and really he'd been in America maybe for about 48 or 72 hours. Wow. So. Yeah, Roland.
A lot of ribbing going on for the big guy, right? With the tuna cans of tuna and stuff like that. A lot of ribbing.
Crazy stories about being hazed in the APW garage, where Roland used to have people living in the garage as a way to pay for the rent on the garage, along with students. A lot of people don't realize this, that APW, was Roland did so many things under the table to make that school exist and to keep the federation running. And I don't think he ever paid a dime in taxes. I think I can say this now. He's been dead, enough years. The IRS has probably given up. But I don't think at any point in time that he ran APW that he ever paid taxes. They were always chasing him and always threatening to shut him down. But somehow... that was his Roland's former life, was an accountant, so he somehow was always able to juggle the books like that.
Yeah.
APW is another story. You guys weren't really involved in any of that over there, but one of these days I'll have to, write a whole thing about it. I think it would make a great Dark Side of the Ring. I think that the whole APW story one day would be an excellent episode of Dark Side of the Ring.
I was pretty close to APW because I lived in San Francisco for 6-7 years. So it was really close.
Yeah, and they were the big fed along with BTW. But we were also talking a little bit about NWA Power and how that was a great little show, and then they're trying to move it now to Shockwave, but a lot of us haven't really caught up with it yet. Ryan, have you had a chance to watch any of it yourself, or?
You know what? Honestly, when the COVID crisis hit, I kind of tuned out with NWA, but I will say I was a big fan of the production that they start out on YouTube with. I like Nick Aldis. I think that he makes a great figurehead for that company. I'm a huge fan of Dave Marquez, both professionally and personally. So anything that he's involved in, I was going to take a look at. But no, I'm kind of like you guys. I guess a lot of this, I think we all sort of unplugged a little bit from wrestling when the coronavirus happened and some shows were canceled. And next thing you know, some of the companies that you watched regularly weren't running shows at all anymore. I'm close to the people in Ohio Valley Wrestling, and they went through their own struggles, over here in Louisville, Kentucky. That's Al Snow's promotion. And of course, known as a long-time developmental territory. I kind of stayed in touch with them just to be able to keep up with what was going on. It's just been, 2020 was such a crazy year just in general, but especially for the pro wrestling industry, that I think we're all just kind of getting caught up now. I couldn't tell you anything that's going on in Ring of Honor right now, to be honest with you. And I'm a guy who covered wrestling. It's almost like we had to pick and choose our moments the last several months of, I'm going to watch this show this week, and maybe I'll catch up with these other guys in a couple of weeks. At least that's from my personal viewing habits. That's how it went.
And it's a risk with so much content. I mean, you basically have to sit there hour, 2 hours, and you got to ask yourself, do I want to sit here and watch this? Am I enjoying this? But there, in terms of content and past content that's already out there, you can watch. I mean, it's right now there's more wrestling than ever before. Absolutely. You just have to pick and choose, Yeah, and there's good in everything. There's something good you can. From Impact to WWE, A&W, there's always something there. But the question is, do I want to sit here for 2 hours and watch the whole show? Even though there's always something you can take out of it. Like I see Ryan with an A&W hat. I watch AEW here and there, but I love Britt Baker's work. I like the way she works. I think she's got a lot. She's just starting out. That's one of the bright spots of that promotion. But there's always something,
Yeah, and I think you brought up a great point that, it's not so much, it's even like with the pay-per-view thing, usually with work and stuff, I'm able to get the shows and watch. I get to watch a lot of things that I don't have to pay for. And then there's other times when I do have to invest my own money to watch something. But at the same time, it's not really about the money. And I think, Javier, you brought it up great. It's not about investing the money into watching a pay-per-view for me as much as it's about investing my time. Could I spend these 2 or 3 hours doing something else, spending time with my family or going out to eat with my wife or whatever? Is it really worth my time? Is there enough content on this card? Are there enough matches and enough storylines that intrigue me on this card that I'm going to invest my full evening watching this? So that's an excellent point.
And I was gonna ask Ryan how he balances the family life and real life with continuously putting out content and articles and interviews. I mean, that's got to be hectic.
Well, they like the money. That's but no, seriously, it is a challenge because I have to, and that's why there are times when I say, on Wednesdays I'm gonna watch AEW. I kind of tend to shy away from the next day if I don't get caught up on NXT. A lot of times what you have to do, it's kind of like a Cliff Notes. You go read the results. And then you kind of come back and say, okay, maybe I should watch this, or maybe I should invest the time to at least see this match or whatever. But yeah, I mean, having kids and a wife and a house to take care of and everything else, and working for 2 different pretty high profile websites now at the same time, you have to not trying to pat myself on the back or anything, but you do have to balance that pro wrestling life with real life, and I've just kind of always told them, this day I need to work all day. This day I'll be off. On Tuesday, I'll be off until the evening, and then I'll probably watch Impact. But during the day, we're going to spend time together. And I think that's true with anybody. If you have a passion and you want to dedicate your life to something, that you always have to find a way to find that balance. Whether you're a writer or a firefighter or a teacher or anything out there, a doctor, in any profession, I think you have to learn to balance your professional life with your personal life. And pro wrestling is no different. I look at it like this, I'm the kid that got to run away and join the circus. I've got to work in the wrestling business. I've got to get paid to write about pro wrestling. If you told me this when I was a kid, I would have told you were crazy. So being able to live that dream and have that passion, for them to see my family, I'm saying, for them to be able to see me so happy and be in a position that I'm in now, I think that helps a lot with the home life. When you're happy, you tend to make your family happy as well.
I know Benny's. Benny being an old school fan, but with the show you're on in the ring with Dan and Benny, you had to catch up and study the new stuff.
Well, and that's the thing. When you guys were speaking, I was hearing something, and I flash back to when I would watch All-Star Wrestling back in the 70s, and I wrote in one of my stories that if there was a mushroom cloud outside and we were getting bombed, I would wait till a commercial to check it out. I mean, I was that emotionally invested. Whereas now, I mean, I watch it more because I kind of feel like I need to just to stay up to date. So when I talk about the current stuff, I sound at least semi-intelligent. But, you know, I do it now because I feel like I need to. When then I did it because I absolutely wanted to, and I never wanted to miss it. And I'd like to have that feeling about something current again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you that when I was in college, Saturday, I was lucky to be in college when Saturday night's main event was going on, was a thing. I mean, we would, you know, get together, everybody would gather around. It was like, it really was an event. Pay-per-views, because they were so uncommon, were something that people really gathered around. It wasn't something that every month there's a pay-per-view of some kind. I mean, hell, you know, when you start calling your pay-per-views like, you know, dumpster fire or whatever, you know, it's not going to really get people, you know. By the way, have we lost Ryan, or is Ryan just absolutely transfixed by our conversation? No, I think we lost Ryan here.
He'll be back.
I'll try to get him back in on the call, but
you can't keep a good guy away. He'll be back.
Yeah, but I thought he was so transfixed by what I had to say that he was just motionless.
Yep.
And didn't want to even.
I thought he was just angry.
Eyelash.
I thought he was like angry at what you were saying. I'm like, well, let them sort it out. I'll just watch.
He's having a little bit of connection issues, but one of the things that you guys were talking about, and I'm totally with you on this, and this gets back to the NWA Power show that we all like, is that it was an hour long, and they really couldn't mess with that format. I mean, I think an hour of wrestling is the perfect amount of wrestling, and that's what it used to be when I was a kid. You'd watch Superstars or All-Star Wrestling or whatever you were watching, you know, and it was an hour long. You could get maybe a couple interview segments that were 5 minutes in length or less. You'd get a couple of squash matches. You get one like main event type match that was usually a quality, you know, two quality guys against each other.
Thing is, it made you want to watch. It made you want more. You know, you wanted more. You know.
Oh, Brian, glad that you're back. I thought you were just transfixed by my statement that you couldn't even bat an eyelash.
I thought you kicked me off for comment.
No, your connection was a little off. We were talking just to get you back in on the conversation, is how maybe less is more, and that was one of the reasons why the NWA Power was good, that it was only an hour in length, and that maybe that would be the secret to maybe bringing people back to enjoying wrestling shows, is limit yourself to an hour and give people a reason to want to see more, rather than having 3 hours and showing repeats of what just happened 2 seconds ago, and having 20-minute promos that go absolutely nowhere, and you're checking your watch and you're just going, you know what, I'm going to go flip the channel to something else and come back, and maybe I'll see 5 to 10 minutes of wrestling in an hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing too is looking back on it, when you said we used to watch the hour-long shows, and it was an hour-long of mostly promos and squash matches. It wasn't even, the like these main event type matches. Now you get 2 hours of pay-per-view level matches or title matches. It was so rare to see anything outside of maybe a TV title match. WWF television in the 80s, you almost never saw a title match unless it was maybe the tag titles.
Tag team. That was pretty
when a title changed hands, you went back to your friends and you would talk about it for days, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
You would say, oh my God, I can't believe the Intercontinental title went over to Tito Santana. He finally got it from Greg the Hammer Valentine. And that would be the topic of discussion for a long time. I don't remember the last time I talked to any of my wrestling friends about a specific title change and what that meant. Maybe when Brock Lesnar finally really loses his title and it stays off of him for a while would be worth discussion. But there isn't a title right now that I think anybody really cares about.
Remember how the internet changed things. You had to sit there and watch Nitro. You had to watch Raw, because it's not like you could go back, you go to the internet and watch all the matches and pick and choose. You had to sit there and watch.
Right.
Now you don't have to watch. You can go online and watch it later, or just watch one match, or just watch clips. But before you had to sit there.
Well,
it's a different or switch back and forth, right? I mean,
when I was in law school, and this was in 1990, and when I was in law school, I used to use these $300 an hour accounts for Westlaw and Lexis to read like the newspapers of different cities to find out what the results were in matches and tell all my friends about, I read in Milwaukee, that they had, these matches going on and so forth. So, again, I think the statute of limitations run out on that by now, but
Well, back in the day, our internet was called Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and you had to wait 2 months to find out the results from cities that you didn't see their shows. The wrestling magazines, and I give credit, of course, to our friend Bill Apter out there. I love. I talked to him last weekend, and for those old what they called Apter mags. That was your pipeline because just like what Javier was talking about, how much the internet's changed things. Now you can watch wrestling from anywhere in the world, but back in the 80s, if you would maybe get, I think we got 3 or 4 different territories, but I never knew what was going on in Portland, with Don Owen and their company, or down in Florida Championship Wrestling, because it didn't air in my area. So a lot of times, you would have to keep up with it through the wrestling magazines, and the magazines were always at least 30 to 60 days behind in the storylines. Yeah.
I think Benny usually has a couple of magazines right next to him.
I actually have
just in case he's invited on a show.
1969 issue of The Wrestler.
My God.
Back in the day, they actually had a pen pal section, and that was my first 15 seconds of fame. I don't know if you can see this.
Almost.
Can you see it?
Not right now. I think you'd have to turn off your background.
Hang on.
There, put it right in front of your face, and I think you'll be able to see
it. Do it.
There we go, right in front. Go
Almost.
closer.
No.
Go closer.
Closer.
No,
anyway,
I think it's the chroma key is killing.
You can. I'm right next to Charles Moorhead. I guess maybe his middle name was Gibbs. But you actually, you would.
You're gonna give his address and phone number too.
Address and not your phone number. You give your name and address, who your favorite wrestler was, and whether you like good or bad guys, and then who you wanted for a I want girls 12 to 14, or I want guys who like Bruno or whatever. And you actually started getting letters in the mail. It was a totally different time, but I. As a kid, when I was in junior high school, I would walk to the luncheonette and there was right against the wall was that magazine rack, and those magazines were like crack. The minute I saw a new one, every penny of my discretionary income as a 13, 14-year-old kid went towards those magazines. I couldn't get them home fast enough to read. And they were read within a couple of hours, and I probably read them 10 times each. But that's what we lived with back then.
In my case, my dad would buy the wrestling magazines to encourage me to read. He's like, here you go. Maybe this will help you read. And I read them back from front cover to the back. I read everything, even the ads.
You know what? The saddest moment for me in my adult life was talking to Bill Apter about the top 10 lists. And I had the guts to ask him, how did you guys come up with the top 10? What sort of research went into the top 10? He said, we just BS'd around the water cooler. And usually it was the thing that we did like right before it was actually the issue was due. Wow. And we would just write it down in like 5 minutes. And I was like, but do you know how many like arguments and discussions my friends had over those top 10 lists of who, why Dusty Rhodes would be number 8, but, Rick Martel would be number 9 or something like that on most popular. We had huge debates over that. And I thought they had like a really scientific formula, and they were working, with all sorts of, it would be like a beautiful mind with the strings of yarn going from poster to poster and all this stuff. And no, they just kind of BS'd it in 5 minutes. And
but he has mentioned, Russell, that he used to have, he would call promoters. For example, he would call Fritz in Texas and say, look, this is what we're thinking about the top 10. Are we about right here? Who should be up top? Who should be? So he would consult in Florida with the Grams and things like that. So he would get some kind of, so they wouldn't be out, not even in the ballpark. So he would Well, that's what he said.
A few of them seemed like they really were from the ballpark, but by and large, it was never based on anything at all. It was never based on any like one loss, because I thought they had like this, back at the offices, they meticulously kept records of every match that Dusty Rhodes was fighting and all this other stuff like you do now. Now people do keep those kind of records, scarily enough, thanks to the internet. But back then, I thought they were doing all that for us. But by and large, it was something they say that Bill Apter said a lot of times, like 5 minutes to go. They're like, "What do you think? Dusty Rhodes more popular than Rick Martel?" Yeah, sure. Yeah.
With popularity, I would think it's super opinion based, but with championships, and depending on what promotion, then there was a logic to who was up top, who was underneath, But it was really always interesting. A lot of fodder for conversation. Always great.
It used to really matter. Now I don't think it matters to the average wrestling fan, the average kid. If you asked him who's better, the Usos or the Vikings, the Viking Warriors, they probably wouldn't care, and they probably wouldn't answer. People have their favorites, but they don't really like. There is no like who's the number one contender. I mean, the WWE will always tell you who that is, but back then, that was something we really seriously followed. We actually really cared. Will Ronnie Garvin ever get his title shot against Ric Flair?
The confusion would happen when you would open your mag, which was 2 to 3 months already out of date, and you would see the top contender, but on TV you would see someone else going for the title. So like, what's going on here? That was always it took you a little bit out of your game, but
yeah,
it was always fun.
Hear that a title changed in a territory and you never got to see it or anything like that. 2 months later you'd see the guy wearing a championship belt. But then especially in the Bay Area, we were not in NWA territory, so we got the AWA mostly. That was, and then the WWF kind of shoved the AWA out of the way, but we never got to see like Ric Flair, rarely got to see like Dusty Rhodes until he was with the WWF. It was the kind of people we could ever see live, and seeing the thing live really made you connected to it. Whereas now, I don't think that's the same sort of thing for the standard kid. The standard child doesn't feel like they have to see wrestling live to be connected to it. If I'm wrong, maybe so, but my kids are not really into wrestling, so I don't really have much to go on.
It goes back to what Ryan said, because on TV you're getting pretty much quality pay-per-view matches. So the pay-per-view seems to become less special. And if you get the network, the pay-per-views are included. They're not really called pay-per-views anymore. They just tell you what event's going. The Royal Rumble.
Well, you're really not think they call it pay-per-view. You subscribe to the network, you're getting it anyway.
It's just different, $9.99 or $10 or whatever it is. You get all the old stuff, the Raw, SmackDown, Next, and the pay-per-views that are every 2 months.
I started referring to them a couple of years ago as premium events instead of pay-per-views.
That's a good way to call them. Yeah.
For the most people just
usually the next night, if it was Sunday, Monday Night Raw would usually feature either highlights of everything that went on on Sunday, or rematches based on whatever match there was on Sunday that didn't go right. They would have a rematch of something like that. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just wait for the rematch the next night, and they'll probably rerun everything anyway. I didn't watch the Royal Rumble. I was at one of the first Royal Rumbles ever at Arco Arena. So it should mean something to me, but it's lost a lot on me over the years, and I just don't feel like it's got that kind of like unique special event type thing. I don't get amped up for, even WrestleMania when it was here in the Bay Area for number 50. Number 30. I didn't go crazy over, and from what I heard, it was probably not such a bad thing, because I heard it was tough to attend, and it was just such a huge money grab for everybody.
Well, Benny has an interesting trivia of who was the first wrestler to ever be eliminated in the Royal Rumble, right? Butch Reed.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
The first Royal Rumble ever. He was the first one eliminated in the first ever Royal Rumble, right? Those are kind of cool little trivia tidbits, you know.
We did a little tribute to him on our podcast, and one thing I did not know about him was he was a professional. He was a professional in the rodeo. He did steer wrestling. I had no idea.
I'm sure the steer didn't like it.
No.
Yeah, I'm sure he had no problems doing that at all, man. That guy, Butch Reed, was just the strength on that guy, and I wouldn't like to be a steer in those rodeos at all, man.
No, What was your favorite incarnation of Butch Reed? Was it when he was Hacksaw? When it was natural? It's got to
be in Mid-South, right? I mean,
yes.
I'm a Doom Butch Reed fan. So,
oh, really?
Yes.
No, they were good too. You like those masks on them, right?
Even though it was the worst kept secret since Dusty Rhodes was the Midnight Rider.
Well, and with him, he was actually supposed to win the title from Ricky Steamboat, when the Intercontinental title, when Ricky was going to go home, and he no-showed that day. And so Vince said to Hulk, well, who you think would be good? And I guess Honky Tonk Man just happened to be walking down the hallway, and he goes, how about him? And then the rest is history. But that could have been Butch Reed's, and who knows what would have happened if he had won it.
Wow.
Interesting.
Butch was always one of those guys that it seemed like he should have done more.
Yes.
In the business. I don't know if there were ever any issues. I've never really heard any horror stories about him, but he always seems like that guy that, he could have been the guy, and we, his tag team partner years later, Ron Simmons, would become WCW World Champion, famously, as we all know. But Butch seemed like he was one of those guys that could have been that dude that broke the mold like Ron Simmons did.
If you talking about promos, just search out some of his promos in Mid-South. That guy was scary in Mid-South, In WWF, he was still, a force to be reckoned with, but in the promos for Mid-South, forget about it. Those are intense, man.
His feuds against the Junkyard Dog, I remember those.
Yeah.
That was
and
early when I was getting involved in wrestling. That was a big feud in the Mid-South. I'd read a lot about it and wish that it would happen. And then the two of them came to the WWE, the WWF, and they never had any kind of a feud together, which was kind of disappointing because I thought that would be a great thing for them to have continued on. It's just like how Greg the Hammer Valentine and Roddy Piper never really faced each other in the WWF, because they were both heels.
But they were bitter enemies in Mid-Atlantic. And
those were some of the most amazing physical feuds of any wrestling, feud that ever existed. But they, that was something that the WWF never thought about, doing. Even when Piper did go face and become Intercontinental Champion, I thought they would do a program with, do some angles with Greg Valentine trying to get his title back, but didn't happen.
Well,
so.
That was also at a time when, the WWF was hell-bent on ever acknowledging that a wrestler had a past before they came to the WWF. Right. I mean, you look at what they did with Harley Race. They barely ever. I think a couple of times guys would mention in promos about him being a 6-time world champion, but for the most part, the company, the announcers, they really didn't acknowledge what guys had done in the past on purpose. Really, I mean, I think that was a missive put down from the top. That, hey, these guys didn't exist till they got to New York.
Well, and guys like both Hacksaws, Butch Reed and Jim Duggan, they were huge in the Mid-South. And when they came to WWE, they were basically, I call it cartoonized. I mean, they were still kind of top shelf guys, but not like they were in the Mid-South.
Oh yeah, like the one-man gang, making him into Akeem,
right. Or the Bushwhackers, who were pretty legit heel team, I think, in Southwest Championship Wrestling as the Kiwi Sheep Herders. They became cartoonized when they came to the WWE.
The sheep herders were one of the bloodiest, most violent
brutal. Yes, sir.
teams before
I remember
they
seeing
became
a
the
barbed wire
Bushwhackers.
cage
Those
match.
guys.
A barbed wire cage match between them and I think it was the Fantastics.
Yeah, it was the Fantastics.
That's
and
some brutal
wow,
stuff,
you're
man.
like, whoa, that was not the same hey type shtick that they were doing in the WWE. So yeah, no, I do remember those guys and how crazy they were and what a change it was.
I'm sure they all had really good paydays in the WWE, but they weren't what they used to be.
Yeah, and so
probably put a lot more miles on their body though,
Yeah.
getting to do cartoon comedy stuff as
Sure.
opposed to the death match types of things. And like you said, Russell, that was the first time. And as I recall, that barbed wire cage, it actually had wooden planks for corners as opposed to it was made of wood. And barbed wire. Yeah,
Splinter City. Yeah, it was. It looked like it was about to fall on them about 3/4 of the match, which was pretty intense. Now I remember that from a long time back. So let's talk a little bit about like where you think the future of wrestling is headed, where we're at right now. How we get out of COVID, and then where do we go back to? Do you think that we'll ever see the 100,000 fan arena filled to capacity for an event ever again?
I don't know. I might have to defer to the other guys on that one because I always like to say never in pro wrestling. But as of now, I think we're going to see the industry as a whole in the next 5 to 10 years downscale a lot. And that includes even WWE, the worldwide leader in the industry. I think, to be honest with you, wrestling, to me, it's not made for football stadiums. Wrestling is made for arenas. And, 10,000 people, 15,000 people in a building. To me, that intimate setting is much better than all the giant stadium, Rose Bowl type, WrestleManias we've seen in the past. I personally like the smaller venues. I like the more intimate setting. To me, that takes me back to the old school days. And it seems like it's more genuine. It's more emotional.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree with that. I think like Ryan said, it's great to be able to fill a stadium, but honestly, what can you, if you're in a stadium and you're into nosebleeds, even with the screens, are you really, there's something lost there. The ring is so tiny and you're watching like two ants wrestle, and I agree with Ryan. Arenas, I think, are the way to go, or even smaller settings.
Well, and back in the day, back in Memphis in the early 80s, they drew 10,000 people to the Mid-South Coliseum every Monday night. I mean, every Monday night. So, I mean, you're a wrestling fan in Memphis, you get to plan your life around wrestling. You get to go once a week and watch some, real good stuff. And now, I mean, living in Tampa, what do they come here once or twice a year if you're lucky? So you kind of lose that, emotional investment because they're not really here.
I wanted to ask Ryan, just switch a little bit to since we're talking about the new stuff. I wanted to ask Ryan who he thinks is the next game changer. Is it going to be Roman Reigns now as a heel? Is he going to be the next big thing in wrestling that's going to bring people back, and people going to remember him 15, 20 years from now, talk about Roman Reigns as a heel?
Or is it Bad Bunny?
Yeah, that's it. Got it right there.
I think obviously Roman's going to go down as not only one of the really great big men. I mean, everybody that thinks that he can't wrestle, you're wrong. For a guy his size, he's amazing in the ring. And I think that he's put on some really great matches. Honestly, I think what happened with Roman is they missed the bus on this 4 or 5 years ago. And now it's just sort of like, yeah, he was down as one of the greats in WWE history, but will he ever reach that legend status of Rock or Austin or Hogan? I don't think so. I think he's kind of a placeholder right now. For me, the guy, and I know I'm going to look like an AEW mark because I'm wearing the hat, but I would love to see what they're going to do in terms of this crossover with New Japan, Impact Wrestling, everything else. I think if you have a guy emerge, maybe it's Kenny Omega, a guy who emerges with 2 of the titles or 3 of the titles, is multi-champion over 2 or 3 different companies, I think that would be something that would really light people's imaginations on fire because it's really not something we've never seen before. Yeah. I think the ultimate answer lies outside of WWE. I think something has to happen on an NWO type level somewhere that forces WWE's hand once again to up their game. They've had 20 years, essentially 20 years of really having no real competition. That's what's going to change. I don't know if it's one guy or one movement. I certainly don't think it's Roman Reigns is the guy that's going to suddenly throw gasoline on the fire and just light the wrestling world back up again. I think there's somebody out there and there's a scenario out there, but honestly, I don't think we've seen it just yet.
I thought you were going to mention Luchasaurus. I'm highly disappointed.
No, I do like that.
I do too.
Team, no, I know. I think honestly, and I wrote this not too long ago in a column, the Power of the Pin column that I write, that Omega could be the most impactful wrestler of, pun intended, the most impactful wrestler of this year if he were able to carry on dual championships, AEW and the Impact World title at the same time, and appear on both shows in different scenarios. That, to me, would be the most intriguing storyline you could get out of one guy right now. But I still think it's going to be more of a movement. It's going to be more of maybe a faction, or maybe just a change in attitude, like the WWE, again, another one there, like WWE did in the late 90s. I think it's going to be more of a fad or a phase that a company goes through as opposed to one guy. Because I don't think that we're at an era now where the audience is just going to buy into a Stone Cold like they did in the late 90s. Or they're just going to buy into Hogan like they did in the 80s. I just think we're in a different kind of era, and it's going to have to be more of a change in attitude or a change in style for a promotion to really recapture the audience again.
I got a question for everyone. How do you get someone who watches boxing, who watches UFC, who watches football? How do you get them to become a wrestling fan with the product today, which is more entertainment than maybe nitty gritty, more like a fight? It used to be like almost like a simulated fight. This guy hates that other guy, and someone's gonna get their butt kicked. Now it's very choreographed. So how do you get the fight fans to get into wrestling?
It's an excellent question. I think that we do need someone that's more of a crossover fan. I think what you were talking about with Roman Reigns and why Roman Reigns won't bring back the fans is that he's just not a great mic worker. I mean, he's had enough time to really, he's no Rock, he's no Stone Cold. He's not Hulk Hogan. He doesn't excite people outside of wrestling itself. Nobody outside of wrestling has any idea who Roman Reigns is. They need a guy that has this sort of cross-platform sellability that the multiple media, like it or not, having Mr. T as part of the original WrestleMania was as big a deal as Hulk Hogan or anything else that was involved in it, because they brought someone in that everybody recognized from Rocky III, and he was on the A-Team, and everybody knew who he was. And it's harder to now surprise an audience and bring something in new that they haven't seen before. So I'm not sure what the next big great thing is. He may not be in wrestling, or she might not be in wrestling right now, and we maybe wait. Maybe it's bringing back Ronda Rousey. That brought in a lot of excitement.
I think it's going to be the women. I think it's going to be the women, honestly.
Yeah, it might be something like that. Maybe they'll get Melania Trump to get in the ring. That maybe that's the next big angle. I don't know, but you never know. Vince isn't quite done yet, so he might still have a trick or two up his sleeve. But
I know Vinny's got some thoughts on this, but I will say Brock could have been that guy if he would have embraced it. Except he's such an ass that it's basically just he shows up, he doesn't have much to say, he works 60 seconds in the ring, and he's gone for a month. Had Brock really, and even I would say Randy Orton, if they had had different attitudes through the course of their careers, either one of those guys could have been megastars, but especially Brock because of the crossover appeal of him being a legitimate athlete, a legitimate champion in wrestling, a football player, and an MMA champion. He could have been that guy. But unfortunately, he just doesn't have the charisma or really the attitude to be the flag bearer for a company. Right. I agree with you though, Russ, Benny. I think that that person's still not out there yet.
Here's one thing I don't really understand with Roman Reigns, and you have Paul Heyman in the ring with him, who's arguably the best guy on the mic, maybe in the last 30 years, best talker, but he never really talks. And I mean, I think he could do a lot more for Roman, if they gave him the mic a little bit more. I don't understand why they're doing that. Why have him in the ring if he's going to be silent?
I think there's a lot of censorship going on. The personalities aren't allowed to come out, and it goes back to Roman. Is it that he's not good on the mic, or do they not allow him to really be what he wants to be? That's a question, Because there's a lot of
they did that suffer and succotash thing. That kind of that sort of railroaded him too when they were feeding him lines and they were trying to make him funny like The Rock. That kind of really derailed him.
Oh yeah, no, definitely no. That doesn't work for him, man. Doesn't work for him.
Well, that's another thing though. You said feeding them lines. Back in the day, none of those guys were fed any lines. They just, they probably got a couple of bullet points and they just took off with it. And now, I mean, you can tell most of these guys, it's a script.
Well, they're just so afraid to make mistakes. It's so micromanaged. They're just so afraid that they're going to make a mistake.
Like a 40-page manual.
Just let him be himself. Give him a broad sense of where you want to go, and just let him go with it. But they're so afraid that he's going to not say his lines right, or he's going to miss something, and it seems so just bland.
Apparently, there's like a 50-page manual they give you for the WWE. On all the things you can't say, can't do, can't allude to, can't point in this direction, can't have your toes pointing in that direction. And it as you pointed out, so micromanaged. That was one of the things I thought was great kind of about NWA Power, is I think you felt like that was really like the opposite, is that wasn't micromanaged at all. That they seemed to come up with a lot of what they were doing maybe about half an hour before the taping.
Yeah, and they made mistakes, but it felt more natural. And I could kind of get into their promos. They weren't perfect, but they just felt like they were more from the heart and through with emotion than say this. That's what the fans wanted, or at least I did.
Old school promos always sounded like two guys that were going to get into a bar fight.
Basically,
they were really acted like they were pissed, and promos today sound basically like a high school play.
That's very well put.
And if a guy couldn't talk, you had a manager, you had a Grand Wizard or a Lou Albano or a Freddie Blassie who could kind of take up the slack.
It's almost like they're trying to overthink. They're trying to change. They're trying to take the essence out of what wrestling is. Wrestling was sold as a fight between two guys who disliked each other. You guys don't like each other, and so I'm going to teach you a lesson in the ring, and no one won here. Then we're going to go into a cage, and I'm going to bust you up, or you're going to bleed. I'm going to take your title. Now you want to feel that, but it doesn't come across in the ring that way for the most part, because I'm not going to throw all wrestling off the bridge under the bus, but you're watching it and I just feel I'm not feeling it. I want to feel that you don't like that guy. That's what I want to watch.
You really felt.
I know it's scripted. I know you guys are working together, but I want to feel that you don't like that guy. That's why I'm sitting here, investing my time in this. Make me believe again.
Absolutely. Yeah, you watch Tito Santana and Greg Valentine. I mean, you had a hard time.
Bing.
Right?
That was my favorite feud of all time. So you just got it.
You really thought that those guys couldn't stand each other. Even something like Jesse Ventura and Ivan Putski. I really thought
when he used to call him
Ivan Podusky, yeah. You really thought they didn't like each other. So, I mean, I don't feel that with any of these guys. They just feel like, they're probably going to go to Wendy's and get a grand slam after the match is over. I mean, I don't feel that anymore.
I wanted to ask that also for everyone. I know with the internet and social media, do you think things like with overexposure of the wrestlers, of the superstars, they're on Twitter constantly like, look what I had for breakfast today, or look, I'm walking my dog, things like that. Doesn't that kill the heel? Or when the heel is taking pictures with kids? Come on, give me just respect a little bit. I know there's no kayfabe, but come on, let's not be that. Everyone now is a good guy. You're a bad guy, but you're a good guy. Come on, man.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. You use the perfect word, overexposed. That was one of the things that made the wrestlers, also, for one, because they were all large back then, and now everybody's the same size. But the wrestlers were larger than life because you didn't see them that much. You really had no idea what they were really like. All you saw was that persona every week, every Saturday, or every Sunday. When your 1 hour syndicated TV show came on, and that's all you got. Now we know everybody's real name. We know where they were born. We know if they played sports in high school. I mean, between Wikipedia and them running their own mouths on social media, we know every single detail about their lives, and we know who they're married to, if they have kids. You know, I remember growing up, I never thought of the Iron Sheik as having a wife. You know, he was just the Iron Sheik. Right, you know, obviously he did. Obviously they all did, but their real life personas were such a mystery to us that we only saw them as the character. And I believe Javier's right. I think now with the internet, and obviously the internet's changed everything in the world, not just pro wrestling, but it's really opened up Pandora's box in a lot of ways, to where the fans really, there is no disbelief anymore. The old saying, suspension of disbelief. Well, it's kind of hard to suspend your disbelief when I just watched the guy getting a manicure with his wife on Twitter a couple days ago.
The mystique is gone. Can you just think about people like Pampero Firpo, heels like that? I mean, those guys, there's a bunch of things that you don't even know about them still to this day. There's still mystique to these heels and wrestlers from the past, even with books. There's a lot of things we don't know. Now you know everything. Right. It's like I just I don't agree with that. There has to be some mystery to wrestling. I'm not saying bring kayfabe back, but let's keep it kind of in the middle somehow.
And you think Brody would have had a Twitter page, or the original Sheik would have been out on Facebook posting selfies? I don't think so. That it was just. Granted, it's a different era, and as you said, we can't bring kayfabe back, but you can at least respect it a little bit. That this generation doesn't at all.
If you're a heel and you don't, if you're a heel and you don't talk to me, we walk past in the supermarket, you don't talk to me. Hey, I respect that. If I ask for your autograph and you say, "Hey, kid, go away," hey, be a jerk with me because you're supposed to be a heel. I'm not going to go on Twitter. He was so mean to me and I don't like him anymore. I'm going to unfollow him. Come on, man. But kayfabe, that kayfabe's gone.
The escapism of wrestling, where you could just be in a universe where it was just the wrestling universe, and that was all there was. And it just, while you were watching a pay-per-view, you weren't really thinking about, the price of tea in China, and you weren't thinking about, is this guy, gonna up when this guy's child sees something, is he gonna be upset, to see someone getting hit in the head with a chair? You just didn't even want to think about those things.
Think about the Oakland Raiders from the 70s. I mean, there's so much mystique behind that team. You really thought they were crazy, and a lot of those guys were kind of crazy.
Some of them really were.
And they sold that image. There's a mystique. That was one of the last.
Like the Road Warriors. The Road Warriors, perfect example of that. They were the two guys that you just said, I would never want to get in the ring with those two and have them do to me what they're doing to the Mulkey brothers.
And a great example you can talk about is Hollywood. I mean, you can watch a movie where Robert De Niro is the bad guy, and even though it's Robert De Niro, you will hate his guts for those 2 hours because he's convincing in that role. How come pro wrestlers can't do that? How come that? Why are we missing that in the pro wrestling industry, where you can't suspend your disbelief when you're watching wrestling, but you can do it when you watch a movie? Again, I use the example, Robert De Niro in Goodfellas. He turns out to be not so nice of a guy at the end, and at the end you're rooting against him, and even though I'm a big Robert De Niro fan, for those 2.5 hours, I don't like him very much. Joe Pesci, great example, another Italian actor that, is always in the mobster movies. He's often the bad guy, even though, Joe Pesci's probably a really great guy in real life. For the time you're watching that movie, you can't stand him. So how come we can't find that mix in pro wrestling now?
Yeah, you want to, he's an actor, but you say, man, I hated that guy in that movie, and you want to be able to go in a pay-per-view, man, I hated that guy in that whole feud. I hated him,
Mm-hmm.
But he was so good, man. Like when I spoke about, Paul Orndorff at the beginning of the show, like that, he was convincing, That's
I think that we're seeing more of that in AEW, and what Japan is bringing in. They have more of that connection. We were talking about Ultraman before the show started, and how people went so nuts and was so believed in Ultraman, as hokey as it was. I loved it as a kid. I think that Japan gets a little more of that, like what showmanship is about, and that you make wrestlers into show persons more than you do these giant bodies that are then under control. Like Vince wants a body first, and then somebody that knows every page of that 49-page manual and won't step out of line. Those are his two top priorities. You know, you look at like a guy like Kevin Owens is really like the only guy that is right now like got any real acting ability for the entire federation. And he is so atypical of what Vince really wants. You know, Vince would rather he, you know, look like Neville, or his body looked like Neville, and he couldn't cut a promo, more than he does that he looks like, you know, Dick the Bruiser, but, you know, is super talented behind the mic.
Right.
You know, Vince would rather have him be a solid cut guy, because that's the kind of guy that Vince wants. I think if we can go back to the, you know, hate to call them the side of beef wrestler, but, you know, guys that aren't necessarily this cookie cutter, you know, perfect body type thing, but guys that can cut promos that are really good at looking like, as you say, guys that want to kick your ass and that are really angry at their opponent, than guys that are just sculpted World Bodybuilding Federation rejects. That might go a long way towards us, you know, starting to care and enjoying wrestling a little bit.
We want wrestling matches and wrestlers.
Yeah. Not bodybuilders and guys that are under control.
You know, remember back off that, what Benny said, we want fights and fighters too. Right. Guys who look like they are really going at it in a match. And I think Javier brought it up earlier about all the choreography that goes on. That would be a huge step. Eliminating that, these 16-step dance moves, basically, it's like a ballet more than it is a fight. And I think that's another thing that needs to be eliminated. You talked about being more convincing. I think I'd be a lot more convinced if it didn't look like, you know, I always call it like a Texas line dance. You know, everybody has their steps, everybody goes through them, and at the end, none of it is entertaining.
You guys are on point. You know, this conversation could go on for another hour very easily, but I want to respect the fact that you know, we're all in different time zones. It might be a little later for some than others. So we do have to wrap it up, but I want everybody to have a chance to plug whatever is going on. So let's start with Ryan first. And Ryan, why don't you tell me what, you know, tell the fans how they can get a hold of you and everything that's going on.
Well, I've got my pro wrestling coverage at sportskeeda.com, and I just recently also signed on to do some work for wrestlinginc.com. So that's an opportunity for me to get to work for two of the biggest and best pro wrestling websites in the world. I always do I typically do a column every Monday called The Power of the Pin, where I just kind of give an opinion on a different take on something that I see in pro wrestling. And as far as on social media, everybody can follow me at Ryan K. Bowman on both Facebook and Twitter.
I look forward to another question of the day. So
oh, yeah, I've got to get some of those out. I've been behind on those this week.
And Javier, why don't you give yourself a plug?
Yeah, sure. You can find my stuff on Pro Wrestling Stories, and if you're not into wrestling that much, also on Pop Culture Retrorama, I have a couple articles on there. And if you just want to hang out and chat on Facebook, you can find me on Facebook, Javier, last name OJST. Oh, and I have a Facebook page, wrestling page, Classic Wrestling Stars.
Excellent. And Benny, please plug away.
All right, same thing as Javier as far as the ProWrestlingStories.com is where I do my writing, and then do a co-host of In the Ring with Dan and Benny, which host is Dan Sebastiano, part of the Wrestling with the Future Network, which is owned by Angelo DeCipio. We usually do shows on either Tuesday or Thursday night, sometimes both. And then on Facebook, you can find me on, it's Benny, Benny, Scala, Scala. And we do have a Facebook page for In the Ring with Dan and Benny.
Gentlemen, I couldn't have had more fun this week if you guys were all here and we were all drinking beers and hanging out together talking wrestling. Anytime you guys want to be on the show again, you're wonderful, wonderful guests. And I really appreciate being able to get to know you, Ryan, and Javier better through this whole wrestling and everything, because it's been wonderful. I wouldn't have flown out to El Salvador to see you. And
just one thing before you close on, I forget, I want everyone to see this is in my. I have to take care of this. I have to give it back. But this is
oh my.
This is supposedly a Central American. Was it a heavyweight championship belt?
Wow.
El Salvador version. This is about 15 pounds, and it's
Wow.
like I just wanted to show that on the show. Supposedly
it's belt though. It looks like felt.
Yeah, it's like felt. It's supposedly circa 55 to 60.
Wow.
And I gotta take care of this belt, and this will be unified with the current Central American belt El Salvador version. But for now, I gotta take care of this.
That's very cool.
That's
Very
amazing.
good.
Falls count anywhere. You're
Was like-
24/7 champ.
Yeah.
You falls count anywhere.
Our truth is in the next room, right?
Yes. So anyway, folks, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. We'll definitely have you guys back on as guests again. And I really appreciate all your input and everything tonight. So we'll see you all again next week. And thanks for coming. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.